first heard that there was this talk of a coal port in Bellingham, some part of me just winced. It felt karmically unfair, you know. Not that I'm a Methodist, not a Buddhist, but it still felt as if karma had not, you know, been. I spend a lot of time telling people out in the rest of the world about all the good things that have gone on in Bellingham in the last little while. There's probably no town in America that's done a better job of figuring out and leading us down the path of local economies, of taking responsibility, of figuring out about local food and local business, about going where we need to go and doing it in a beautiful and community-wide way. And it always makes me incredibly happy to be here and to see people like Michelle Long and all the people that I just admire and like so much in this place. And so I really did heave a kind of sigh when I heard that. And then I thought for a minute longer, and I thought maybe in some ways it was the perfect place for this fight to be taking place. The perfect place for y'all to get to take what you've done on a local bit, the sort of conscience and responsibility that you've shown on a local level, and demonstrate it on a global level just the same way. Now, since my job here tonight is as, you know, as outside agitator, I won't tell you you know all you need to know about the local aspects of this, and you can figure those things out and decide them. I don't get to say, you know, what I think about how many train cars a day are appropriate going through, or how much particulates from diesel emissions are a good thing or a bad thing, or how much coal dust you want. And I don't know how to, you know, how you're going to weigh the jobs that would come with this against the jobs that you could have from a thriving waterfront. And I don't know what effect it'll have on property values, or what effect it'll have on kids' lungs, or what effect it'll have just on the quality of life. This is, by many measures, you know, they always say, one of the happiest towns in the U.S. I don't know whether this will make you happier or not. You can figure that out, all right? But I'm here to talk to you about the context, the larger context. I'm here to talk to you not about what that coal will mean when it's coming through Whatcom County. I'm here to talk about what that coal means in the world at large. Because this accident of geography, the fact that there happens to be a nice stretch of deep water off of Cherry Point, has thrust you guys into the middle of the most important set of battles that the world has ever had and will ever have. The fight over this question of climate change at its most important. Accidents of history happen like that in particular places. History isn't just something that happens. And when Bob was talking about village greens, it made me remember, you know, I grew up in the town of Lexington, Massachusetts. And my summer job for years was giving tours of the Battle Green. And I would be out there in my tricorn hat leading tourists around, and it was actually a kind of wonderful thing, because it always made me remember that those weren't, you know, great patriots and famous leaders. Those were, you know, a few dozen people in a farming town in Massachusetts who were willing to stand up to the greatest empire on earth and start the kind of first anti-colonial revolution there ever was. Those kind of accidents of history in particular places are what you're now going to experience, because you stand the possibility of being a real choke point, a break on one of the worst things that could ever happen. Let's talk about coal for a minute. Coal is the most dangerous substance on this planet, the most poisonous thing. And to understand why, we got to talk just for a minute about the science, the physics and chemistry of the world that we inhabit. Now, I wrote that first book about climate change back in 1989. And we knew back then, 22 years ago, most of what we needed to know about climate change. We knew that when you burned coal and oil and gas, you put carbon in the atmosphere, and we knew that the molecular structure of CO2 trapped heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. The only thing we didn't know 22 years ago was how fast this was going to pinch. And the story of the last 20 years is, unfortunately, it's pinching a lot harder and a lot faster than we thought, you know. Climate change is extraordinarily real already, and if you want to understand why, just look at the events of the last 12 months. 2010 was the warmest year for which we have records around this planet. 19 nations set new all-time temperature records. That's itself a record, and some of them were extreme. We were on the phone with our 350.org crew in Pakistan one day in June, and one of them said, "It's hot here today." And I was surprised to hear him say it because it's usually hot in Pakistan in June and you wouldn't remark on it. But he said, "No, it's really hot here today. We just set the new all-time Asia temperature record. It was 129 degrees that day." Now, I don't know what it gets in Bellingham, where I live. If it gets to 100 once a summer, trust me, we're all bitching and moaning. And, you know, add 30 degrees to that, and then for 98% of Pakistanis, subtract the air conditioning, and you have some sense of, when you get heat like that, bad things start to happen. Last year, the Arctic melted again at an enormous pace for the 4th year in a row. By the end of the summer, both the Northwest and Northeast passages were open, and people were having a yacht race through territory that even a decade ago, no one thought a human being would ever be able to navigate, you know. You saw the pictures from Russia, where there was tremendous drought and fire. It never reached 100 degrees in Moscow. It was over 100 for 8 days at the beginning of August. And one of the things that happened was that the Kremlin got spooked and stopped all grain export to the rest of the world. They're the 3rd biggest grain exporter on the planet. The price of wheat and corn went up 70 or 80% overnight. That means, and it's stayed there ever since, that means that there are lots and lots, billions of people around the world tonight who are eating less than they would like to eat because temperature is already going up. Maybe the most profound pictures of last year came from Pakistan, from those enormous floods. One of the key facts of this century is going to turn out to be that warm air holds more water vapor than cold. That means that the atmosphere is already about 4% moister than it was 40 years ago. That's a big change in a basic physical parameter. It loads the dice for deluge and downpour and flood. And those loaded dice, there are a lot of places that have been throwing snake eyes in the last couple of years. Pakistan might have been the most acute. There were, well, there's a part of up by the Khyber Pass where they normally get about 3 feet of rain a year. And they got 12 feet of rain in a week at the end of July. And that's why a quarter of the country of Pakistan was underwater by the end of August. They said a couple of weeks ago, the Red Cross said there were still 4 million homeless people in Pakistan from that flood. All right? All the stuff that I've been describing happens when you raise the temperature 1 degree. That's how much we've raised it so far. We've added about 3/4 of a watt of extra solar energy per square meter of the Earth's surface. And that's been enough extra energy to melt the Arctic and do all those other things. Here's the bad news. What the climatologists tell us is, unless we get off coal and oil and gas very quickly, much more quickly than most of our political systems are planning to at the moment, that 1 degree will be 4 degrees before the century is out. If 1 degree melts the Arctic, we would be fools to find out what 4 degrees does, because everything that we can discern about it is bad, bad news. A pair of researchers at the University of Washington last year put out a study showing that at 4 degrees, we'd produce about 1/3 less grain on this planet than we do now. Try to imagine what the stresses and strains on this Earth would be like with 1/3 less calories to go around. We've already made the ocean, the beautiful ocean, 30% more acid than it was 40 years ago. because it's absorbing so much carbon from the atmosphere. And that extra acidity, I mean, think about that. Just sort of wrap your head around that for a moment. The ocean is our metaphor for vastness, but we've managed to change its pH just by dumping carbon into the atmosphere. And already that's making it difficult for these all the small animals that are at the bottom of the food chain to form the shells that they need. The chemistry of calcium gets difficult in those kind of more acid conditions. And so that's trouble, big trouble. Already, sea level is on the rise around the planet. And it's going to get, unless we take action very quickly, a lot worse. The latest estimates, the new data from just a few weeks ago from the measurements of ice in Greenland, are that we can expect not the 2 feet of sea level rise we thought we were going to get in this century, but someplace closer to 5 feet. You probably can go home on Google Map and figure out what that means for Bellingham, you know, and where the water comes. That comes a long ways if you raise the ocean 5 feet. But here, you'll probably have enough money to figure out how to cope with it one way or another. Not the case in place after place after place around the world. And that's what I want to talk about just for a minute. Because you guys are going to have, you know, a year's worth of good, hard fight on this coal port. You're going to win it in the end, but it's going to be a good, hard fight. And most of the time that you're fighting, you'll be talking, as you should, about things close to home. That's where you live, and you should be thinking about what your air and your streets and your bay and everything else will be like. That's appropriate. But you also need to keep some corner of your mind open for what people everywhere else around the world are going to go through if that coal makes it out from Montana and Wyoming and gets burnt, if that carbon gets poured into the atmosphere. That's a lot of carbon back there. That Powder River Basin is one of the biggest pools of carbon in the planet. And so the things that happen here will make a difference to people, say, in the Maldive Islands. That's a country I've spent a little time in the last few years. It's one of the prettiest places on Earth. It's an archipelago of 1,200 islands strung out across the Indian Ocean. You know, white sand beaches, palm trees, incredibly nice people. It's a entirely Muslim nation, an island culture. It's been there for 5,000 years, okay? The trouble is, the highest point in that archipelago of 1,200 islands is about 1.5 meters above sea level, all right? It's they're pretty much out of luck unless we somehow manage to put a brake on things right away. Now they're trying hard. They have decided they'll be the first carbon neutral nation in the planet. By 2020, they're building windmills everywhere they can, doing everything they can think of, but they can't do, you know, trust me, they don't burn enough fossil fuel to make any difference at all, you know, except symbolically. It's countries like ours that produce 20–25% of the CO2 on the planet, or China, where all this coal that comes through Bellingham is destined to go and be burned. Think about countries like Bangladesh. The last time I was there, I mean, Bangladesh, it's an incredibly beautiful country, very fertile, very crowded, 140 million people in an area the size of Wisconsin, so very crowded, but they feed themselves because it's so lush and fertile and dense. They're in trouble because the oceans are going up and because the glaciers that feed their rivers are dwindling. But when I was there, the trouble they were having was acute, not chronic. They were having the first big outbreak they'd ever had of a disease called dengue fever. All right? It's a mosquito-borne disease, and it's spreading like wildfire all over the world because that mosquito likes the warmer, wetter world that we're building for it. I mean, in fact, if someone from a, you know, alien planet is looking through a telescope at our Earth and trying to figure out what's going on as we alter the composition of the atmosphere, a reasonable explanation would be that we had embarked on a large mosquito ranching experiment of some kind, you know, because that's what we're doing to this Earth. But they were having this big outbreak of dengue, and it was terrifying to people. There were pictures all over the front of the newspaper of what the mosquito looked like, and what. I was spending a lot of time in the slums, so eventually I got bit by the wrong mosquito, and I was as sick as I'd ever been, but of course I was strong and healthy going in, so I didn't die. But I remember going down to the hospital in Dhaka, and the bigger space than this, and just people lined up on cots and shivering, because it's one of these hideous tropical that makes you shiver. And I remember sitting there thinking, God, is this unfair? That 150 million people in Bangladesh, when the UN tries to calculate how much carbon each country in the world emits, you can't even get a number for Bangladesh. It's a rounding error in those calculations, They're not causing this problem, but they're suffering from it. Just like people all over the world are already suffering from the way that those food prices go up. Now, if the price of corn goes up 80% like it has in the last year, that's not, easy for some people in this country, but it's not the end of the world. It means that the price of a box of Captain Crunch or something goes up a dime or whatever, because basically you're buying the box anyway, not the corn. But if what you buy every day is cornmeal to make a tortilla with, 80% rise in the price of food means you eat less, means you have less to feed your kids, means, trouble 3 times a day. I'm not in any way, my point is not in any way to try and make people feel guilty or that they should act out of guilt or anything else. It's to try and just make you realize the sort of sense of solidarity around the world that we need now if we're going to deal with the first really global problem that we ever had. So think about that coal for a minute. Here's one of the ironies of that coal. You know why they need to build a train line out here? It's because all over America in the last 3 or 4 years, local environmental groups have done a terrific job of blocking new coal-fired power plants. Groups like the Sierra Club have taken an enormous lead, and where 4 years ago there were plans for 150 new coal-fired power plants around the U.S., all but a handful are now off the books, not going to be built. That's a tremendous victory, unless you're the guy that owns the coal mine in Wyoming. And then you start to think, where am I going to sell all this coal to? And you think, I better try to sell it to China as fast as I can, before they figure out that they shouldn't be burning it either. And they're starting to figure that out. I have a piece in the current National Geographic about China and energy. And the Chinese are putting in more renewable energy than we are now around their country and doing really beautiful things. But these guys are determined to sell the coal there just the same way that the cigarette companies were determined to go sell cigarettes all over the developing world once we started to wise up a little bit here about what smoking meant, all right? And the accident of geography means that there's not an infinite number of places for them to get that coal out. This bottle only has a few necks, and you happen to be in one of them. And there are a few others, and people in those other places are fighting too. They're fighting in Longview. I was up in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago for the first big rally about the coal port that they're going to try to do there, and there was a crowd like this, and it was wonderful to see. The possibility of winning this fight is very, very real. Geography plays into the hands of those of us who aren't powerful or rich, It gives us some opportunities. I want to finish by talking about that solidarity a little bit. Just by talking about the work that I've done the last few years, because in a certain sense I feel the need, I think, to justify the fact that I've been doing nothing but travel the planet spewing carbon behind me for the last 3 or 4 years. About 3 or 4 years ago, we decided that we needed a real political movement around climate, that it wasn't enough just to tell our leaders that what the science was, because that wasn't getting through. They were hearing too much from the fossil fuel industry, who were too financially powerful, and hence we weren't getting any real action. Now, when we started trying to figure out how to globally organize, the first thing that we ran into, the reason that people don't really organize globally much at all, is the simple handicap imposed by the fact that people all over the planet insist on speaking their own language, all right? And this makes it hard. In January of 2008, our foremost climatologist, Jim Hansen, and his team at NASA published a study, the most important scientific study of this millennium. It said, we now know enough about carbon to know how much is too much. They said, any value for carbon in the atmosphere greater than 350 parts per million is not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. That is strong language for scientists to use. It's stronger still when you know that here and every other place in the world, in Washington and in Warsaw and wherever you want to go, the atmosphere is 390 parts per million CO2 already, okay? We are too high now. That's why the Arctic is melting. That's why this is not some future problem, but a present crisis. And the thing that Hansen and his team said in that paper was, our only hope for getting back to 350 is if we stop burning coal now. If we keep that coal in the ground where it is safe, where if you're inclined that way, where God was wise enough to put it for safekeeping, you know, that's where it needs to stay. Now, we started taking this number around the world. And we'd go all over the world and have meetings like this one. And one of the things that I like about being here is that we're outdoors. Because it reminds me some of being in India or being in remote parts of Africa or things, and just having meetings like this outdoors, talking about just this kind of question and trying to get people started, involved, and organizing. And we didn't know. People said, this won't happen, it can't work, people with numbers are too difficult, you don't want to rally people around science, poor people have other things on their minds, so on and so forth. We set the first date for trying to kind of do a big global thing like this for October of 2009, October 24th. And there were people in this crowd who helped enormously. We asked people everywhere to do something that day, and we didn't know how well it was going to go. And we got the sense that it might really work 2 days early. We were sitting in an office in Lower Manhattan, and the phone rang, and it was a 17-year-old girl that we had trained in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And she was in tears. She said, the government's taken away our permit for Saturday. We can't do our demonstration the day everybody else is going to. We're doing it today so they can't stop us, but we are so sorry. We don't want to spoil it for everybody. We were so hoping to do it the same time as everybody else. And we've got 15,000 people out in the street right now chanting 350. I was like, don't worry about the date, it's okay, you know. The picture showed up a few minutes later, and it just blew our minds. And then for the next 48 hours, those pictures came over from around the world. There were 5,200 demonstrations in 180 countries. CNN said it was the most widespread day of political action in the planet's history. And we did it again last fall, and it was bigger still. There were 7,400 of these in every country in the world except North Korea, including beautiful stuff right here. And we're going to do it again in September, on September 24th. It's called Moving Planet, and we want you on bicycles that day, out really. And one of the reasons that we're on bicycles is because they're one of the few things that both rich people and poor people around this world use. And that was the thing that was so amazing about those pictures that came in from around the planet. I had spent my life hearing that environmentalism was something for rich white people who had taken care of their other problems, that it was a luxury. Most of the people it turned out that we were working with around the planet were poor and black and brown and Asian and young, okay? Because that's what most of the world is made up of. And oddly enough, they care just as much about the future. Maybe more so, because the future is bearing down on them harder than it is on us. Now, it's always for me a great privilege to get to be in those rooms and in those fields and things talking to people like that, especially in those poorest places. And I cannot tell you how much I admire those people. I'm not sure that I'm a good enough human being that if I was in Bangladesh, I'd be willing to work with, Western environmentalists. I think I might be so mad about what was being done to me in my country that I might just shake my fist and say, go away. But they're not. People are moved in those places by the solidarity they see coming from the West, to realize that there are lots of people who understand what's going on, understand that it really is one planet. We spend a lot of time over the years, mouthing cliches about how it's a small world and we're all brothers and sisters. Really, climate change is one of the first chances we've ever had to really find out if that's true or not, to really find out how knit together we're going to be as a planet, how willing we are to stand up for each other. So the only thing I'm going to say to you, you guys are going to do, it's going to be a great fight and a wonderful one, and it's going to be going on. I mean, I think tomorrow evening, right, there's a chance to sit with the mayor and talk about this. And there'll be many more hearings, and you'll need to figure out ways to support, resources and other people to keep them strong and fighting, and you'll need to keep fighting, because there will be times when it gets sort of boring, or it'll seem like you're going to lose, or that the forces on the other side are too big and too strong and whatever else. I have no doubt, though, that in the end you will win, and I hope that when you do, one of the things you feel really good about is protecting not only this place, but helping to protect so many other places, helping to really do something of great practical significance for people all over the planet. Just by accident, you guys ended up in a really important place. And there are no set of people, I think, that I'd rather have entrusting that duty to than y'all. I know that you'll figure out how to do it, and I thank you in advance.